I do think this is a company that is sort of hitched to that stronger U.S. Economy. We didn't think that we were going to see a soft landing, and albeit we've managed to see some real strength in the U.S. This is a company that, as Lisa was saying, is really reliant on big trucks and SUVs. It's not necessarily what generates the headlines anymore, where we pay a whole lot more attention to electric cars and to self-driving vehicles. And honestly, the execution in those areas for GM has been pretty weak lately. But what we've seen is a company that had some real disruptions late last year with the UAW strikes. A lot of makeup production toward the end of the year after the strike by the UAW. Once that was resolved, and looking forward into the new year, not having as much investment going into Cruise, the self-driving unit, and of course, not having to worry about a disruption on the labor front. You don't have to account for that for another 4 years.
Craig, we were just talking about auto loans and how high they've been recently. A lot of people having underwater loans, even with their car values depreciating at a faster pace than their loan. How much do you think the rosier outlook for GM is hinged on this idea that rates are going to be lower and it's going to be easier to borrow to make those purchases?
I think to the point raised earlier, the fact that GM has an in-house financial lending arm allows for them to do some subsidizing of borrowing costs for customers. Of course, there's not quite a situation where you can entirely offset the fact that borrowing costs have increased, but there is some ability to have some flexibility there if you're GM or Ford. These are our lending units that are extremely strong, and as much as we've seen some weakness in some of the numbers looking at sort of the health of the auto borrower and the fact that a lot of loans we've seen some underwater loans soon after the point of sale. We are seeing some pretty strong demand for cars in the U.S. When we're talking about 16 million unit outlook on GM's part, that's basically peak roughly peak sales volumes for the U.S. And I do think that we've gone through a few years now of customers not being able to go to the market because of the supply chain issues, the lack of supply of vehicles out on the dealership lots. Now that those are no longer depleted, customers are seeing deals out there and deciding to pull the trigger.